A cold wind swept through the bustling streets of Washington, D.C. as pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks, their coats pulled tightly around them. It was just another day in the city. People too busy to notice the forgotten souls who sat on street corners, wrapped in tattered blankets, holding out cardboard signs in quiet desperation. Among them was Robert Jenkins, a 67-year-old homeless veteran, hunched over near a gas station, his weathered face barely visible beneath the hood of his faded jacket. His sign, written in shaky black marker, read, "Homeless vet, just need a ride." He wasn't asking for money or food, just a ride. Somewhere warmer, somewhere safer. The occasional passerby glanced at him, some with pity, others with indifference. A few muttered apologies before walking away, avoiding eye contact. The world had long since stopped noticing men like Robert, until a black Cadillac Escalade pulled up at the gas station. The SUV, with blacked-out windows and discreet security detail, was unmistakable. It belonged to the President of the United States, Joe Biden. Inside the vehicle, Joe Biden sat in the back seat, flipping through a briefing folder, his mind occupied with the next meeting on his tight schedule. The convoy had stopped to refuel, a routine break in an otherwise tightly controlled itinerary. But then, something caught his eye. Through the window, he saw Robert sitting near the curb, his frail hands clutching the cardboard sign. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow. The face of the homeless veteran, the haunted eyes, the quiet dignity despite his situation. It all struck Biden with a force he hadn't expected. He closed the folder, his fingers tapping against the leather armrest. Then, to the shock of his security team, Biden reached for the door handle. "Sir, we advise against," but he was already stepping out. The freezing wind bit at his face as he approached the man, his polished dress shoes tapping softly against the pavement. Conversations among bystanders stopped mid-sentence. People gasped, some pulling out their phones, unsure of what they were witnessing. Robert looked up, his cloudy blue eyes squinting against the light. He recognized the face immediately. "Mr. President," he croaked, his voice hoarse from years of hardship. Biden crouched down, so they were eye level. "Hey, pal," he said, his voice warm but steady. "Where you headed?" Robert hesitated, disbelief flickering across his face. He had asked for a ride, but he had never imagined this. "Just anywhere warm," he admitted, his hands trembling as he rubbed them together for warmth. Biden studied him for a long moment, taking in the deep lines on his face, the scars that told stories only a soldier would understand. "You're a vet, aren't you?" Robert nodded. "Vietnam. Marine Corps. Served my country, came home, and—" He trailed off, his voice breaking. Biden exhaled, nodding slowly. Then, without hesitation, he gestured toward his car. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you somewhere warm." Gasps rippled through the small crowd that had gathered. Secret Service agents exchanged frantic glances, but they knew better than to argue. The president had made his decision. A security agent stepped forward. "Sir, we should arrange." Biden raised a hand, cutting him off. "No, he's coming with us." Robert stared at him, his lips parting in disbelief. "Are you serious?" Biden smiled. "Wouldn't be the first time I gave a Marine a lift." The next moment, Robert Jenkins, once a forgotten soldier, once just another homeless man, stepped into the back of the president's car. The door closed behind them, and outside, the world watched in stunned silence. Inside the warmth of the Cadillac Escalade, Robert sat stiffly, his calloused hands resting on his lap, his body tense despite the heated leather seats. The soft hum of the car's engine filled the silence. Across from him, Joe Biden sat relaxed, his hands clasped together, studying the man in front of him. "You warm enough?" Biden asked, breaking the quiet. Robert nodded hesitantly. "Yes, sir." He glanced around the vehicle, his eyes lingering on the presidential seal subtly embroidered into the upholstery. This is not how I imagined today going." Biden chuckled lightly. Neither did my security team. He glanced at the agents sitting in the front, who were still radioing back and forth, trying to recalibrate the president's schedule. Robert shook his head in disbelief. I don't get it, he admitted. I'm just some guy on the street. Why stop for me? Biden's expression grew serious. Because no one should be just some guy on the street, especially not someone who served this country. Robert swallowed, his throat suddenly tight. For years, he had felt invisible, forgotten. But now, here he was, in the back seat of the most powerful car in the country, speaking to the President of the United States like an old friend. Tell me your story, Biden said, his voice gentle but firm. Robert hesitated, his fingers fidgeting with the frayed edges of his sleeves. But something about Biden's tone made him feel like he could speak. Like, for the first time in years, someone actually wanted to listen. I joined the Marines when I was 18, Robert started, his voice distant, as if pulling memories from the depths of his mind. Served 2 tours in Vietnam. Lost some good men out there. Came back, but home didn't feel like home anymore. Biden nodded, his expression unreadable, but his eyes sharp with understanding. Robert continued. Tried getting a job. Worked at a factory for a while. Then the plant shut down. My wife. She passed a few years later. Cancer. His voice faltered. Didn't have kids. No family left. The car was quiet, save for the occasional crackle of the Secret Service radio up front. After that, Robert sighed, shaking his head, things just fell apart. One bad month turns into a bad year, and next thing you know, you're sleeping under bridges, standing outside gas stations, holding up signs. Biden didn't interrupt. He just listened. Robert let out a bitter chuckle. I didn't even want money. Just a ride. Just someone to look at me like I was still a human being. Biden took a deep breath. Robert, I'm going to be real with you. We've got programs. We've got shelters, veteran services. But they don't always reach the people who need them the most. Robert scoffed. No offense, Mr. President, but I've heard all that before. People talk big, but nothing ever changes. Biden met his gaze. Then let's change that. Robert's brows furrowed. What do you mean? Biden pulled out a small notepad from his coat pocket, flipping to a blank page. Give me names. Veterans you know who are struggling. Shelters that aren't doing their job. People who need help but aren't getting it. Robert blinked. You serious? Dead serious, Biden said, handing him a pen with the presidential seal on it. No one fights alone, Marine. Not on my watch. Robert hesitated, then slowly took the pen. His hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope! As the car turned a corner, approaching a government housing center for veterans, Biden glanced out the window. We're going to get you off the streets, Robert, and we're going to make sure others don't end up there in the first place. Robert didn't know what to say. For the first time in years, someone had truly seen him. And for the first time in years, he actually believed things could get better. As the Cadillac Escalade slowed to a stop in front of the Veterans Housing and Rehabilitation Center, Robert stared out the window, his weathered hands gripping the pen Biden had given him. He still couldn't fully process what had just happened. Hours ago, he had been sitting on a curb, invisible to the world, just another forgotten soldier. Now, he was stepping out of the president's car, about to walk into a place that could give him a second chance. The door opened, and a cool gust of air swept in. Robert hesitated, glancing over at Biden, who was watching him closely. You don't have to do this alone, Biden said, his voice steady. Robert swallowed hard. I don't know how to start over. Biden gave a small nod. One step at a time, Marine. You already took the first one. A staff member from the center approached, clearly surprised to see the president himself escorting a veteran inside. The woman extended a warm smile. Welcome, Mr. Jenkins. We have a room ready for you, and we'll get you settled in. Robert looked back at Biden one last time. I don't know how to thank you. Biden placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Just pay it forward. When you're back on your feet, help the next guy who needs it. Robert gave a slow nod. I will. As he stepped inside, the door closing behind him, Biden exhaled, his gaze lingering on the entrance. His security team was already waiting, ready to take him to his next scheduled event, but for a moment he just stood there, lost in thought. A nearby journalist, who had captured everything from the moment Biden stepped out of the car, approached cautiously. Mr. President, why stop for him? Biden turned to him, his expression unreadable. Then, after a pause, he simply said, because he stopped for us first. And with that, he got back into the car, leaving behind a moment that the world would never forget.